Okay, thanks for joining the Securing the Customer Experience talk here at CIS. Today we're going to focus on the security side of the Customer Identity and Access Management, or CIAM, and why it's important to approach it not just from an enablement standpoint, but also from a security standpoint. So we can then understand how to balance the two appropriately. So to get us started, how many folks here have both B2B or business-to-business customers and B2C or individual customers? Excellent. So out of those folks that just raised their hand, how many of you have well-defined processes and technology supporting your two disparate user types, customer types? Oh, okay. So I don't think I saw any hands. So that's great. I'm glad that you're here and we can talk together for the next hour and 20 minutes for our track. So we're going to dive deeper into some things that we've seen in the industry around CIAM space and how we can approach securing those various customer experiences in our organizations while protecting their and our data. So my name is Janelle Shalk. I'm based out of Northern Utah, and I've been with Optiv in the Identity and Access Management practice for almost 5 years, and I lead up our strategic consulting and access management solution areas. I've been fortunate enough to be exposed to a pretty huge variety of organizations and their use cases and technology and everything in between around internal and external customer management over the course of my about 16 years in security and risk space. So I would imagine each of you are at the talk because customers are an integral and extremely important part of your business. There's probably a wide range of approaches and maturity at your organizations and around the supporting processes, people, and technology around the customer identity management space. So let's lay the framework of how and why CIAM is important to your business. First, we want to make sure that our customer managers, our application developers, our service provider think tanks all understand who our customers are so we can develop appropriate services and supporting security for our customer needs. Gathering and protecting information on your customer enables us to support their needs, know who they are, know how we need to interact with them, know what services we need to develop and provide to them, know how they'll be accessing those services, and how we can both enable and protect those methods. And finally, how we can support them throughout their relationship with our organizations. Part of knowing who our customers are also includes knowing how to protect their data and the consequences of not protecting that data, whether it's by losing or leaking their data, thereby compromising the confidentiality of their data, inappropriately or inadvertently changing that data, thereby compromising the integrity of the data, or by having our services and their data not available to them, thereby compromising the availability of their data. We want to make sure that we're supporting all of those things for our customers. So now we understand who our customers are. How do we approach enabling them and what they need and to do what they need to do with our services? This can in large part be determined by whether they are a business-to-business customer or an individual B2C customer. For those organizations that have both, we may have disparate use cases and supporting technology, but all with the ultimate end goal of reducing frustrations around having to navigate our processes and our technology, improving adoption of self-service capabilities across our customers to reduce the customer management overhead wherever possible and make our customers feel empowered, and managing what could be millions of different registration actions, update actions, and transactions a year, a month, or even a day for the largest of organizations. Ultimately, by enabling our customers, we continue to build up loyalty, build our brand, and ultimately build our revenue. So that leads us into growing our business. We want to incentivize our customers through streamlined, common sense, easy processes with pretty interfaces that require almost no thought. This is a tall order for a lot of organizations, but it's imperative in this everything is available at my fingertips, instantaneous world of 2017 and beyond. So by allowing our organization to grow our services to our customers and automate and streamline those services to the extent possible, we can free up our internal resources to focus on continuous development and strategic initiatives, which ultimately will end up with growth of our customer base and growth of our organization. So Now we understand why CIAM is so important to both our business and our customers. How do we secure that customer experience and their data from start to finish? So we want to begin in the beginning with the registration process. We want to enable our customers to register their identities and sign up for their desired services, but do it in a way that's secure. For B2C customers, that might start with making sure that we can validate that they're even a real person wanting access to our real services. We can do this by enforcing a variety of steps during the registration process, such as sending a code to them on SMS or an email based on the information that they provided us during the registration workflow process. We can require them to input CAPTCHA results to reduce the likelihood that they're not even a person at all. We can ask them to identify the one address they've never lived at or the 3 people they've never been married to, but recognize that this is all based on publicly available information, and so it's not a fail-safe mechanism for identity assurance. We could also provide federated options around identity providers such as Facebook, Google, or LinkedIn if there's a situation where we don't need to actually create and manage and store their identities on our systems for them to access services. Businesses have a wide range of ways of handling the creation and registration process for customers, so there's lots of different ways that we can do that. With B2B customers, we can allow delegated administration, which we're going to talk about in a slide or two. And then once the customer is registered, we need them to be empowered to select the services that they need and perform other self-service functions like updating their information securely, resetting their password when they've forgotten, and more. So resetting the password requires us to have a reasonable level of assurance that they are who they say they are without actually having them authenticate. So it's an interesting use case. And we have some mechanisms that we are going to talk about in a couple slides where we can go over ways to do identity assurance. So customers should be provided also with the ability to select the services that they need based on their relationship to us. So for example, should a B2C customer have the ability to register the exact same services as a B2B customer? Maybe not. But should a B2B customer be limited to the services that their parent organization has signed up for and is actively paying for? Absolutely. So we have our customers registered and signed up. How do we protect their data appropriately? For B2B customers, we may have requirements or desires around complete segmentation of the data on the back end, such as a DB2, LPAR, or logical partition. We may have really big customers that need their data completely segmented. We may have other complex applications or systems and customer needs that require us to have separated databases or at least tables within databases, or perhaps just views to those databases if that database is one of the services that we're providing them. And then there's less complex customers, and providing access to just their data within a single view of an application or a database may be completely appropriate for those customers. When configuring access either with fine-grained entitlement provisioning or with a role-based access or profile concept, we should always be focusing on the least privilege approach to that access, meaning we want to provide the access to the customer just for what they need, just for what they've registered and are paying for. And that's for, of course, both B2C and even probably more importantly, B2B customers. All of this allows us to balance our accessibility with security and provide an acceptable level of risk to our organizations. So as we mentioned before, we want to have the appropriate services provided to the customers. We can do this through dynamic portals that have changed based on the access the customer has and the services they're registered and paying for. This is especially applicable to B2B customers who could have wildly different experiences with our companies. We could have one customer who has just a single service that they're paying for and that they're interested from us, and then we could have other customers that are completely wholly reliant on our services that we're providing. And we want our portals and the way that the customers are accessing that information to be dynamic and to be driven directly by what they're paying for, so we need to understand what did they register for, what is the current status of their billing, and what types of users are accessing the system. I talked to somebody yesterday at our booth who was presenting this use case around, they have really big partners. This was a very big company. They have a really big partners, and they have hundreds, if not thousands or hundreds of thousands of customers accessing from a single business, and they want to be able to correctly control the access within that business and the different folks that are accessing from that business. So you may have 10 people out of 100,000 that need access to this one particular service, and the rest of the 999,000 people shouldn't be accessing it. So it's really important to have dynamic, specific access for our customers, especially on the B2B side. B2B customers often like to have control of their own destiny when it comes to our organization's services. By allowing delegated administration, where one or more delegated administrators have been created on the customer side and given the ability to create, update, and ultimately terminate access for their businesses, folks that are accessing our services, within the confines, again, of what their organization is paying for and signed up for, we as the service providers can greatly reduce our customer management overhead and, again, make them feel empowered. Providing delegated administration functions, however, should be very carefully planned out and understood because you are giving them administrative privileges into your systems. So you need to understand what is the inherent risk of allowing this to happen and controlling the way that they access, authenticate, and ultimately are authorized within your systems and what they can do. We want to make sure ultimately that they're only allowed and enabled to manage the access for their business and for their folks and seeing their data. Another option for managing B2B customers is through the integration between a customer's authoritative source, like an HR system, and our organization's customer identity management system, so our workflow and provisioning engine. This could be done by a scheduled, like weekly, daily, or monthly feed that we get from their HR system and gets SFTP'd into our network and stored on a file share. We could have scheduled tasks that then pick up and aggregate that information into our IAM solution and goes out and does provisioning activities based on the information that that client has provided. We could have a more ad hoc way of approaching this with just random bulk feeds that they give us. We could have CSV files that are 2 columns, extremely simple, that just have the usernames as those people are represented within our systems, and an A for active and a T for terminated or inactive. However we manage it, all of this enables us to be able to get rid of stale accounts, which is a really big problem that a lot of organizations have, especially around B2B users. So onto the identity assurance mechanisms, how we can step up authenticate our customers appropriately based on risk. In this world of possibilities, we have a ton of options about how we can make sure our customers are who they say they are with a wide range of interfaces and entry points. First, we need to understand how they're accessing our services. Are they on mobile devices, on their laptop, at a kiosk, accessing their company's desktop? Whatever it is, we need to understand what kind of services we need to provide. That also, in turn, is going to drive how we support them in their attempts to authenticate. So when we think about authentication, do our organizations have a goal of removing passwords for our customers? Is it even possible to provide that kind of experience to our customers based on systems that they may be trying to access that are 10, 20, or 30 years old? Could we put a front end on top of the authentication experience that speaks more eloquently to the customers of today, that they don't need to know all these different passwords to get into our systems? We, of course, can do federated authentication with our larger B2B customers, but we always need to understand that for a lot of our organizations, we may be dealing with mom and pop shops who don't have robust federated capabilities, and so we need to understand how we can manage their resources, the authorization, and ultimately how they're authenticating into our systems. We can enable authentication via mobile applications like Duo or VIP, where an authentication attempt, is made. Everybody is probably familiar with this, and you get something that pops up, and you click OK or yes, and you prove that you have the device that you said that you had upon registration or the last time you updated your information. We could send emails or text codes to the customer that they have to either click on or that they have to type into our portal to authenticate. We could perform recognition activities on the user's device and their browser that they're attempting to authenticate from, and see, does it match the same profile as the last time they authenticated, or is it different? Are they now on a Mac when they used to be on a Windows machine? And then elevating the authentication if it doesn't match. We could perform behavioral analytics to get to the root of who they are by perhaps comparing the previous times that they've authenticated and the activities that they performed during that session and the way that they perform those activities versus their current session and activities. Are they logging in from a location they've never logged in from before? Are they logging in from Russia, where 5 minutes ago they attempted to log in from Santa Fe, and thereby they're kind of violating the geovelocity settings and making what we call an impossible journey? Are they logging in at 3 a.m. when they normally log in the middle of the day around noon? Every time they've ever logged in before, it's never been at 3 a.m. We're also going to go over in a couple slides some biometrics examples and how we can apply that to the real world with a use case around universities. So we can help have some assurance based on company unique identifiers as well. Personally identifiable information, or PII, is something that we do often have to capture about our customers. Social Security number, of course, is the most common one. We, in the CIAM business, never want to touch Social Security numbers. It's kind of like the black hole, the death thing that we don't want to deal with. But ultimately, sometimes we have to gather it, whether it's because it supports some kind of billing thing or whatever it is. Like if you are a customer of a power service, they always gather your Social Security number so that they can go after you if you don't pay your power bill. If we are gathering and storing this data already, it's a possible assurance mechanism that we could utilize for our customers. We need to, of course, understand that storing and transmitting this data has a pretty high risk associated with it and a higher likelihood of compromising that data, which can have extremely detrimental effects both to our customers as well as to our business, especially around reputation loss. We could do other things like storing the employee IDs of B2B customers, the employee ID that they have at the organization they actually work for. That could be another unique identifier for us to couple with other authentication mechanisms. Another emerging trend in authentication is graphical password schemes, which is pretty exciting. It allows us to authenticate via pictures instead of text character strings for passwords. I have a couple examples of those in a couple slides. And then finally, all of these assurance mechanisms need to be evaluated from a risk and priority standpoint and against the types of customers that you have, the maturity of those customers, their willingness to adopt technology and different types of ways of doing things, or perhaps their unwillingness to do this. So when should we utilize these step-up authentication options or alternative authentication options? First, we need to understand what does risk mean to our organization, and which can start with understanding the data classification and the risk of confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements not being met for our customers. We want to then define what are our organization's crown jewels, and what are the crown jewels of the data that we're managing and providing services for around our customers, and then what's less important, and how do we balance everything in between. Once we've done that, we need to evaluate our customers' risk at the identity level and then at the transaction level. So identity risk is that cumulative whole picture of who a person is in relationship to our organization. So an example of a customer that may have access to high-risk services, or perhaps our example that we talked about previously, which is a delegated administrator. They may inherently just have a higher risk identity, and so we need to provide additional step-up authentication measures around any time that they access our system. Then on the transaction side, perhaps we have a standard identity or a lower risk identity, and they're doing something behaviorally that is different. We can then elevate the risk of that transaction and at that point in time require them to step up authenticate or provide additional assurance mechanisms. And then additionally, on the transaction risk side, we could have a standard risk identity, standard behavior, but the service that they're trying to access at that point in time, the one of 5 services that they are provisioned with access to have, that 5th service is inherently a higher risk service, and therefore, again, we need to transactionally, at that time, when they click on that service, require additional authentication or assurance mechanisms. So each of these scenarios require us, at the end of the day, to understand what our data is, understand the risk of exposure or manipulation of that data, and map out our transactional elements in a risk-based way. So as we talked about earlier, there's a few examples of biometrics that we're going to cover. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with them. Everybody probably uses Touch ID on their phone. It's an extremely popular way of authenticating this day and age. There's the idea of like iris scans, for example. It's not widely implemented right now. Maybe it could be in the future when we have the right supporting technology that's easily available for our customers. A lot of us gained familiarity with voice recognition through movies like Sneakers and facial recognition through movies like Minority Report. But how do we apply these in real-world situations? So as I mentioned earlier, there's a use case at universities, which is, I think, extremely interesting and exciting, where they're implementing facial and voice recognition for their students. So the student of the university, let's say they're a remote student. Either the university as a whole is remote, the class that they're taking is remote, or just the student is remote. Whatever the case, universities are looking at ways to ensure that the student is actually who they say they are when they're taking exams. So instead of having, like, paying somebody or asking your smarter friend to take an exam for you, they want to actually visually or audibly, not just with username and password, confirm that the student is who they say they are. So they're utilizing solutions like biomids, who provide the mechanism to train the solution with your face. So there's a picture of my face, and it says that it's denied because I'm frowning, and in all of my trained things I was smiling and the lighting was better. So it's not going to allow me to authenticate. So I would have to move and make sure that I was in a setting that I had trained it on. But they can learn who you are and what you look like and what you sound like, authenticate you, and then you can take your exam. But still, you could have your friend sitting right outside of view, and as soon as you did that initial authentication attempt, they could swap places with you and take the exam. And so universities are trying to prevent that through continuous authentication, where they are continuously, throughout the exam, screening your face and making sure that you haven't swapped places with someone else. They can also, through your camera built into your laptop or whatever the student has, see if there's multiple faces in the room. So, at least in the camera view. So again, you can't be sitting there in front of your laptop, but your friend is sitting right next to you, telling you what to click. So it's a really interesting way that universities are utilizing biometric authentication for continuous authentication in the student realm. So there's a world of possibilities in biometric authentication, and all of them, before being implemented, we have to understand what is the impact of a false positive, what is the impact of a false negative, and what kind of device do we have to ensure that all of our customers, whoever they are, have in order to utilize that particular biometric mechanism. So finally, I want to go over some examples of graphical authentication, which I think is super exciting. So there's a lot of organizations that everybody's talking about, how do we get away from passwords? Well, it's not really possible in a lot of cases, but there are certainly ways that we can get away from passwords, or at least supplement passwords from an assurance mechanism. Studies have shown that people remember pictures and graphics considerably better than they remember text strings. We're a very visual society. Everybody picked out their clothes because they like the way it looks, and you do your hair because you like the way it looks, and so we're a visual society, and we can empower our users by providing them visual passwords. So in the first example, we have a series of icons that are displayed to the user upon their registration process. They go through registration, and just like when you would set up your password, your text string password, you set up a graphical password instead. So when you authenticate, you have to select it in the right order. So here we do the polar bear, the banana, Cartman, the ice cream cone, and the sheep. Now that's our password. And just like with character string passwords, we can set password parameters, and so we can say, okay, well, we don't want the password to be all of the icons in the top row. Well, that's not a very safe password, just like the word password isn't a very safe password, and yet countless people still use it. We can make it so you can't select the 4 corners to be your password, or you can't select, 3 pictures right next to each other. Whatever it is, we can set those same parameters just like we can on text string passwords. Next, we have a series of pictures on a mobile device. We can just swipe through it in the right order, and it'll authenticate us. Again, we set this up during registration. Other examples of graphical authentication are you have a single picture, and you can select any of the components of the picture or the negative space of the picture, and that, again, has to be selected in the right order for you to authenticate. So the example, we do the clock, the watch, the safe, the bureaus, left handle, and the camera. Another example, which is just a workflow because there's nothing fancy to look at on this, is we have if we have certain types of customers or internal users that we know the device they're going to be authenticating from consistently, we could have this idea of a pixelized image being stored both on the customer's device and on our authentication or application server. And we compare the two at a pixelized level to see if they are the same password or the same picture, and then we can authenticate them again. So that's pretty exciting. Again, of course, it requires the device to never change, and so it's a very specific use case that we would need to make sure that we vet it out really well. And then most of us are all familiar with the idea of selecting a picture, like when you're logging into your bank, you select the monkey. Now every time you go in, the monkey is there, and you can know, okay, I can know this is my bank's website. It's not, being spoofed. And then you can know that I'm saying, yes, the monkey is the right thing, so you have, again, a reasonable level of assurance that I am who I say I am. Alternatively, if I type my password wrong, maybe you show me a sheep instead of the monkey, and I have to know that that sheep is not what I selected. So it's kind of a neat mix of assurance. So there's lots of different ways of approaching graphical authentication. Again, I think all of them are super exciting. With the appropriate scenarios, they can be applied to your customers. So with that, what do we do now, and how can we apply this information to securing your customer experience? So we want to start with understanding and defining our risks associated with your customers and their data. We want to map out and understand the processes around the customer registration and user self-service lifecycle processes, and how we can not just enable but secure those processes. And then we want to investigate ways to break the password bubble with additional authentication methods. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Rob for his portion of the talk, and then in 20 minutes, at the end of Rob's talk, we're going to have a combined Q&A thing. Thanks.